I think the role of leaders really is not just to lead, but also be able to offer that hope because people are looking up to them. And the only way we can be able to do that is to be custodians of their future and to actually be stewards of our collective resources. And I think if we were able to do this, it would really mean a lot for many people, especially the people who've been disenfranchised, people who have been in the margins and haven't really benefited from our prosperity. And so I think our collective hope is quite important.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mauricio Hernandez. I am the founder of Universidad del Futuro. And today I present to you episode 11 of our interview series with our guest, Kenyan futurist Nancy Muigei. Nancy holds a Bachelor in English and Literature at Kenyatta University. She also holds a Master of Arts in Development Studies, Conflict Resolution and Human Security at the International Institute of Social Studies of Erasmus University, Rotterdam. Nancy is a governance advisor and a governance expert. Her expertise lies in foresight and futures studies, research, strategic advisory, policy formation, monitoring, evaluation, learning, and project design. Our conversation was a very fruitful one, and I am sure that you're going to like very much what she says, especially coming from a perspective from Kenya and from Africa. I will see you in our next episode. Take care and see you soon. Thank you very much, Nancy, for accepting this interview. It was something that I was looking for some time, and I really welcome you to this interview series. How are you today?
I'm doing really great, and it's evening here in Nairobi, so it's towards the very end of the day, and I'm so excited to be here.
I'm glad that you are here, and since I checked on your LinkedIn profile, Nancy, I think it's amazing and it's impressive all that you have done, because you're very young, but still you have a very long academic and professional background. So I would like you to tell us all a little bit about your academic background, about your professional background. So please just tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you so much. So I think I would say I come from a multidisciplinary background. And what I mean by this is that I have my foundation is in education, linguistics. So I specialized in African literature. And apart from that, I've also done work around international development. And my master was in development studies, yes, but I specialized in conflict, reconstruction, and human security. In terms of my work experience, I've worked mainly in the governance and election sector and a lot, and I would call myself an anti-corruption expert at this particular point because that has mainly been the bulk of the work that I have done, including work around conflict and work on elections. And really it's about how to support the public sector, how to be able to support civil society. And my interest in these particular areas has been really driven by the fact that I would really want to be a solution to help iterate the problems, but also find solutions to some of the wicked problems that we have, especially like intractable development problems that we experience, like poverty, corruption, amongst many other development problems. And looking at my background, I've also had a very good experience, especially when it comes to futures and foresight work, which I think is the intersection and interest in terms of where you're coming from, Mauricio.
Sure, I know. You then have some studies in international development. Where did you do your studies in this area?
Yes, so when I was doing my undergraduate, this was back then in 2003 to 2007, we had one particular unit, it was called Development Studies. And I really got interested about this particular unit because I performed really well in that particular course. And so I became quite curious to find out how I could actually have practical experience in the area. And at that particular point, we used to have student strikes and university strikes because of either the lecturers were not being paid well or students were not happy with the quality of education. And I remember during this particular strike in 2006, Kenya was going to be hosting the World Social Forum in 2007. And at that particular point, the Green Belt Movement, which was an organization by the late Professor Wangari Maathai, who was the Nobel Peace Laureate in Kenya. She was going to be speaking at the event, and she was looking for someone who could be able to help her manage events and just manage the entire World Social Forum piece for the Green Belt Movement. I was quite lucky at that particular point because we had just gone on strike. I had this interest in terms of understanding development studies, and then I get the job for that particular summer holiday. And what that particular exposure in terms of working with the Nobel Peace Laureate was the fact that I was able to work on diverse issues. At that particular point, she was working on the issues in Darfur crisis. So she also happened to have been the chair of the ECOSOC forum. So I got to really grasp a lot of issues at that particular point. And my curiosity around this area actually grew, not just from my experience, but also just trying to understand how I could be able to work in this space. And so after my undergrad, I did work in Parliament for 1 year, and then I got into civil society work. And along the way, I got to see a course at University of Oslo. It was a summer program on international development studies. And so I did apply and I got a scholarship by NORAD, the Norwegian agency. And it was basically like, I think 45 days. And I actually did the course. What that course did for me was it first of all provided me an opportunity to understand more about international development studies, but also it gave me a lens, and also I was able to step back and look and ask myself, is this what I want in terms of international development studies? Because it was quite broad. It covered a range of issues from climate change, education, conflict, and I really wanted to specialize in a particular thing. And so at that when I came back, I was able to apply for my master's with an informed choice, and having had this particular stint at University of Oslo. And at the point when I came back, it was around 2009, we had just come out of the post-election violence. And so I became quite curious about working in the conflict area and looking at issues to do with human security and reconstruction. And the reason as to why I was kind of keen on this is because I had very good foundation in terms of foresight work, because I had around the same time I had been working on futures work, and I found it quite interesting in the sense that for futures work you needed to have people from different disciplines, and so that became my interest. And I applied to a school in the Netherlands called the International School for Social Studies, which is part of the University of Erasmus. And I joined the program in 2011 to 2012, although I did my application in 2009. And to be honest, I've really, I would say I've really had a very good, rich career in terms of experience, exposure, and just being able to go for what I like and being able to push myself to just enjoy everything that I have been offered.
Which is very important. And so this was the first time you had this encounter with Foresight and Futures, but it's been a long time then, right? So how was it? How did you become involved with it? How did you say, I like this and I like this very much, I want to work on it?
So in 2009, I joined an organization called Institute of Economic Affairs. It's a think tank here in Kenya, and we worked a lot on public policy, and we advised policymakers from parliamentarians to government ministries, but also even the private sector. And around the same time, we had just emerged from the post-election violence, and a lot of young people had been involved in the violence, either as foot soldiers, but also there was that disgruntledness from young people. And we really wanted to understand what would be the future of Kenyan youth looking 30 years. And that is how I got involved, because I came on board as a research assistant for the Youth Fact Book. And then out of this particular Youth Fact Book, we actually had an entire process, which we call the Kenya Youth Scenarios. And the video is actually available online. And we literally went to all the regions in the country. At that particular point, we had not promulgated our new constitution. So we had 8 regions in the country, but right now we have 47 counties. And the question that we did pose to these young people was, we were trying to understand what will be the future of Kenya 30 years from now. And we were looking at the year 2030. And this was in 2010 at that particular point. And so I was involved in this project until the very end when I went for my master's. But after I came back for my master's, and even while I was still in Netherlands, I did participate in a gaming for scenarios with the Institute of Futures in the US. And it was basically, we called the game Catalyst for Change. And in the Catalyst for Change, we were trying to understand how to be able to look to resolve issues around the Sustainable Development Goals. And at that particular point, it was we were looking at the MDGs, yes, because we were getting to 2015 and there was going to be that review, but we were also looking at the upcoming SDGs. Mm-hmm. And from there, I never got to engage much in terms of scenarios, except now that I have, which is almost like 10 years now, is when I have been involved in futures a lot. And so I recently just was a fellow in one of the programs with the School of International Futures, SOIF. Yeah. And I did look at the future of data governance in Africa. This is work that we've just completed and about to get published. And we also have like a whole animation around it, just looking into the data governance work. I've also participated in the Futures for Africa with the African Union, looking at the Agenda 2063 of the African Union. I've also done, I think when you're in this field, when it comes to foresight, you get to participate in different things. But what I also liked was that I also was a facilitator just recently for the recently launched OECD report. So I facilitated in one of the breakout sessions. And for me, this particular, what I would say about my engagement with foresight work is that I would say I'm really emerging. And although I really want to be able to build my experience. I really want to be able to lead processes and even build on the work that we just recently did on the data governance for Africa. And I'm looking forward to how I can be able to just write more about that. Yeah.
I see. And something that you have said is that, well, you started to work with these projects where the youth was very important. And I think in general, the youth, young people has always been important for you and has been part of your work, not only with Foresight and Futures, which I think is of course, very, very interesting. But you also have worked with some other kind of projects. You, for instance, have some voluntary work as well with the Emerging Leaders Foundation. Uh, would you please tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, so I volunteer as a mentor for the Emerging Leaders Foundation. This is one of the organizations which, when Obama was here, he did mention it in his speech and congratulated the founder. And essentially, what I have done is just been able to offer my time to young people who are interested in international development or even just interested in leadership. And so, what the program does with Emerging Leaders Foundation is that they have a structured program where young people who are interested in various aspects of leadership are taken through. And after they are done with that particular program, they are attached to mentors who they can work with in that particular period. And so I have been one of the faculty in terms of mentors who I have been able to mentor a number of young people. And also individually at my personal level, I've also been able to connect with many, uh, I would say, young professionals who are interested in international development, but also even interested in politics because I'm a governance advisor currently with the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. And a lot of my experience there has been mostly on governance and international politics. And so for me, it's really how can I be able to hold the hand of another young person and share with them my rich experience and also learn from them because there is a lot in terms of what you can be able to learn, especially from the other. And this has been really fulfilling for me. Perhaps it could be a reflection that I need to go back to school to do my PhD so that I can be able to go and teach.
So in this role now that you have as a governance advisor, um, and taking all this interest you always have had in young people, for instance, how do you combine everything now in your current role? How do you combine foresight and futures, your interest for young people, and your current
Mhm.
work? What would you
Yeah.
say about this?
Yeah, I think for me, when it comes to governance advisory and the work that I currently do, I lead on accountability, which is anti-corruption. And foresight thinking is quite important because foresight comes from the school of systems thinking. And for you to be able to really address some of those intractable problems, especially in development, and
Mhm.
even when it comes to governance, you really need to have tools that can help you, first of all, understand what the problems are. And I find that foresight tools are quite important because it doesn't just look at a particular issue, but you try and look at things from a wide perspective. And so for me, when I look at my work, especially drawing on my foresight experience, I think that has been the richness of it. That has been like the icing in the cake. And I really like it because I get to look at things not just in the short term, but I'm also able to look at it from the long term and what the implications might be. And having a foresight, that foresight lens also helps me to look at what are the silent trends, especially things that we might take for granted that might actually shock us in the future, including trying to look at the different questions that we need to be able to address at this particular point. And so for me, being able to combine the foresight tools and also the governance tools like the political economy analysis has been quite interesting. And I think the future, especially as we look at looking at addressing the current problems that we face and looking at what is happening in the world, I think there needs to be that particular acknowledgement on the need for unpacking what systems thinking is and how systems thinking can actually be very useful in terms of helping us resolve some of these problems that we go through in the world today.
Definitely, I think this approach is one approach that we should have everywhere, not only in the developing world, but everywhere, especially when we are doing this work in government. And we should have this capacity to think in terms of systems and to think about the future more systematically. And that is something that I think in general we are not doing, especially in many developing countries.
I think in the last one and a half years, we've been through a pandemic in terms of looking at where we've come from, which I think really reset. It really brought us to a reset in the sense that it wasn't expected and we didn't imagine that this could actually have happened.
Mhm.
And so being able to step back and think about how to be able to adapt in this particular world, but also what do we do in the event that we go into a similar kind of perspective. And so for me, having lived through this particular pandemic and where we are right now, my sense in terms of where the world is that we we still are struggling with inequality, and COVID has really exposed a lot of issues that the world is grappling with. And in fact, in some instances, it's gotten worse, especially in societies that are quite closed and in societies where uh, leaders have taken advantage of these lockdowns to be able to uh, become to sort of usurp some of the democratic gains that these countries have made. And for me, my concern, especially as we look into the future, is to think about the young people and to think about some of the problems that the world grapples with. And one of the issues is the issue around employment and employment of young people. The
Mm.
other issue is the issue of dignity, people being able to live in dignity, and the cost of living. And I think one of the major issues, especially as we look into the future, is how do we change our economic model? Is it possible for us to be able to move from the neoliberal model, because it doesn't seem to have helped us um, address some of the inequalities that we have seen, and especially now that we have lived through this pandemic and we have seen the impact of what it has done. And so for me, these are some of the things that I am concerned with, especially around the disparities and even the gap between the rich and the poor and what that has meant.
Yeah, and I agree with you because I think that's something that has affected a lot of countries, including your country, including my country, including basically, I think all the region in this on this side of the world. Latin America in general has suffered from that, from and from the application of this model, and I think we have to think in something else, definitely. So let's let's focus a little more in your country, in Kenya. So it is very interesting to me to know that this work in Foresight and Futures has been done since some years ago. It's not a new thing in Kenya. It's something that has been done for a number of years. What would you say is the current state of the art of Foresight and Futures in Kenya? Uh, how is everything related to that right now?
Yes. So I think it is like, first of all, my my observation about the foresight and futures field is that it's really a small club of people. So it's a very small club of people. Everyone knows each other, and so because it's a very small club, and it's really made up of, it's almost exclusive in a sense.
Mhm.
So even in Kenya, there are only two organizations that have been quite instrumental in terms of the foresight and futures work. And this is the Society for International Development and the former organization I worked with,
Mhm.
Institute of Economic Affairs. And so they have been the two leading organizations that have built their expertise and skills around this area. And then when it comes to who are the experts, there are really a handful of them in Kenya. And I was lucky because one of the leading futurists in Kenya was my mentor, but also my boss. And so I have been quite lucky because I've worked under her. And even after I left working under her, she's always called me back to be able to support her and just work with her.
Again, what's her name?
Katindi CV.
Excellent. Thank you.
And
Yeah.
so what Katindi has done is that she's actually begun an academy where she's training young Kenyan and African futurists who can be able to do futures work in their communities and in their organizations. And in a sense, what she's trying to do is to devolve this whole sort of break away from the club, but have this particular process where young people can now be able to participate and engage in the futures work. I also found the work with the School of International Futures, which is based in the UK but working around the world, quite useful in this aspect because they also have been very intentional in terms of mentoring the next generation of futurists. And so for me, looking at the state here in Kenya, especially on futures work, it's one that is hopeful and it's one that it's growing. And it's not just growing here in Kenya, it's growing across the continent. And so being able to have spaces where we are collectively meeting and collectively sharing the work that we do and also trying to see how we can do additional projects, especially like, for instance, when we were exploring the question around data governance and its future in Africa, that was quite useful because, for instance, the work that I did in that particular process was being able to tackle the question around circular economy, like what do you do with all these technological advancements that you have and where will the waste go to and how do we actually manage the waste that comes from having all this tech. And I'm talking about the hardware and whether we have policies and how our countries are preparing for that. And so for me, when I got into the question of that, it was quite interesting because initially when we were talking about the future of data governance in Africa, I actually thought it was going to look at issues to do with data privacy, data governance, amongst other things, which is quite useful and we did explore. But we also looked at the flip side, especially around issues to do with mental health, issues to do with environment, and even issues to do with how to be able to detach ourselves from this social media and the internet. So for me, I'm very hopeful and I see a very bright future, especially looking at the work that is going on in this particular field. I think what needs to happen as well is to consolidate. So I don't think we've gotten to the consolidation, but right now what is happening is that we are collectively working together in terms of the different projects, but consolidation of our work has not really happened. And I think it's at the consolidation stage where we will really be able to do a lot. And what I mean by this is that being able to document our journeys, being able to document what we've been able to do, and actually having a site where you can be able to access this information. Because I think with the access of this information and publishing of this particular work in a consolidated manner would actually be able to provide a very good, rich resource for people to be able to engage and understand what the continent and even Kenya is producing.
Yeah, of course. And this that you have said is very interesting to know. And I think at all this work that has been done, maybe not only in data governance, but in a lot of topics as you say, not only in Kenya, but in general in the continent, is very, very important to know. Talking about the state of foresight and futures, not only in Kenya, but in general in Africa, in all the continent. How do you see that? Because I have talked to some people in Africa, but basically in South Africa, for example, and they have a lot of people doing this. They have their even their own association of futurists and professionals of foresight. But how do you see the rest of the continent?
Yeah, so based on my exposure and just engagement with the School of International Futures, that is when I first of all had access to different practitioners in the field, in the futures and foresight. And I think for me, the continent is quite actively involved, because if you look at the academia, like the institutions that would actually be able to train and be able to provide you with the skills in terms of going deeper and understanding more around futures, you'll find that schools like Stellenbosch, which actually has a fully fledged master's program, diploma, and I even think PhD,
Yeah,
uh, have been quite instrumental in terms of driving the agenda. I don't know whether there is any other futures institute outside of Stellenbosch, but for me, I think this is quite a field that has potential for growth, and I think evidence of evidence of the different scenarios that have been built on the continent does suggest that there is a lot of expertise. What I don't know about, especially, is whether we have an association on the continent. So I'm only part of one particular network, but I also know a few futurists in South Africa because, as I mentioned, the futures field is quite it's quite a big field, but it's also small because everyone knows everyone. And
yeah.
so as you continue engaging in this particular field, you get to interact and your work intersects with theirs. And so for me, I see there's a lot of potential, especially given the fact that we have institutions that offer courses in this field, but also the fact that there's been that growing interest in terms of use of scenarios and foresight thinking to just be able to sense the world and understand the different things. What I have found quite interesting as well, especially on the continent, because initially when, like in 2009, 2010, 11, thereabout, when I was engaged in this work specifically, a lot of focus was mostly around scenario building. But I have seen, right now, I have been involved in gaming. I've also seen work around futures, the use of futures essays, the animation. So there's a lot of there's a lot of venturing into the different tools within Foresight, including horizon scanning. Like the South Africans are very good with that. And so for me, I think there is a lot of potential, and it's really a growing field. What Perhaps what needs to be done is to document more so that we can be able to understand what are the sites and who is behind the different work that is happening. Yeah.
I'm very sure that you are going to create something about that in Kenya someday, very soon. I'm sure that we will know about this. What are the main signals, the main trends you are detecting now for the future of your country? And taking those, what would be your preferred vision of the future, or the future you see for Kenya?
Wow, that's quite a complex question. And complex because right now I think my mind has been mainly wrapped around the upcoming Kenyan election, which is next year. And I think elections are quite interesting in the sense that it does offer us a time to be able to think about our collective political futures, but also a time to be able to just reflect and listen to the different political agendas that politicians have. And so for me, when I look at the future and especially like the signals, one of the key things that I sense in looking at what is currently happening is one is the question around cost of living
Mhm.
and how to be able to improve our cost of living by looking at our economic model. And this, when you listen to politicians, especially the different political divide, they seem to be speaking about the same thing, but they think that they are speaking from different perspective because they seem frustrated with the neoliberal model and the failures it has had, especially around not being able to create sufficient jobs, but also some of the underlying structural issues like having to service loans and the impact of IMF policies on our economic development and what that means for our future. And so some of the signals that I am quite concerned about is, first of all, is the future of young people and what that means, especially going into the future. Will
Mhm.
we really address the issue around employment? And then two is the question of governance and how to be able to ensure that we have a leadership that is able to advance progressive policies, but also inclusive development and inclusive growth that would be beneficial to everyone. The other thing that I'm also concerned about is whether we are actually able to come up with an economic model that breaks away from the norm and how that would look like and who would drive this particular process and whether the current crop of leadership is actually able to birth this particular kind of economic model. It is one that I guess needs a lot of thought, but also intentionality. But looking into the future, it's really about how can we bring back hope and not just hope that we can be happy in the moment, but I mean hope that we can be able to look back and say, this is what we always wanted as our collective Kenyan dream. And now we are realizing our collective Kenyan dream. And I think that would be quite transformational, if I can say that.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's something that would be very important, especially considering that in Kenya you have a lot of young people, young young people who wants to know what's next and what kind of future we are building for them now. The people that now has the responsibility of creating this future world for them. What what are we doing? What are we doing? And I think that's important in your country again, as it is in mine. And this is awesome because I would tell you, at least here on this side of the world and in my country, basically in Mexico, I don't think we are doing that. We are not thinking about the future of our young people, and we are not thinking about what's next, about this project of the future, this united vision of what we want. And you said something very interesting as well, because I just had a conversation with a futurist from Iran very recently, and he was telling me the importance of foresight and futures practitioners to create and to focus on hope for our people. He said the work of foresight and futurist professionals is very important to generate and disseminate hope for our people. And it is very related to what you just said.
Yeah, like when I think about hope, it takes me back to 2008 when Obama was running for president.
Yeah. All right.
And
course.
I could see the way Americans would listen to him and they would like tear up because they could relate to his story. And I think hope, in a sense, hope gives us that faith in the future. It gives us that impetus to be able to look and work towards that end, even if things are not looking so good in the current present. But because of our failed governance and the different issues that we have gone through, you find that many people have lost hope. And so many people have become disenfranchised, disengaged, apathetic to different issues. And so hope is quite important. And I think the role of leaders really is not just to lead, but also be able to offer that hope because people are looking up to them. And the only way we can be able to do that is to be custodians of their future and to actually be stewards of our collective resources. And I think if we were able to do this, it would really mean a lot for many people, especially the people who've been disenfranchised, people who have been in the margins and haven't really benefited from our prosperity. And so I think our collective hope is quite important.
Definitely, and I love this phrase. The leadership is important. It's important because they are the custodians of the future. That's something that we must understand. I really love this phrase, Nancy. What would you say to people on this side of the world, in the whole continent and Latin America in general, about the importance of the future? You have said a lot of things regarding that so far. I think very valuable things. What would you tell to people here about the future?
Yeah, for me, when I think about Latin America, what comes to my mind is your your rich history in terms of movement building and how that has really inspired many movements around the world, and especially around ecofeminism and even conservation of the environment. And so when I think about the future and I think about Latin America, one of the things that I look and I'm hopeful is that we will always be a movement because you have shown us what movement building is and being able to look up to Latin America and how we can be able to strengthen our movement globally would would be something that I would really look to with a lot of hope and future to the future. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Nancy. Thank you. Um, is there anything else that you would like to say that I didn't ask you?
No, I think we've exhausted everything. All I can say is thank you so much, and I look forward to coming back again. And even once the world is back to normal, I don't know whether it's going to be normal again.
Mm.
I look forward to traveling and one day perhaps visit Mexico. Yeah.
Of course, please. You will be very, very welcome in here. And I really appreciate your time and
Yeah.
your eagerness to take this interview. Where can we contact you, Nancy? Your social
Yes.
media, your email. Where can people contact you?
Yes. So obviously on LinkedIn with my name, Nancy Muigei. And if you're looking for me on Twitter, I use the name Kenyan Griot. And Kenyan Griot means Kenyan storyteller. I
Hmm.
use the same name on Instagram and also on Clubhouse.
Great,
Yeah.
excellent,
Perfect.
excellent.
Yeah.
And a final thing, your full name is Nancy Chepkwech Muigei.
Yes.
Uh, what does your middle name mean?
So I actually have four names. I don't, it's just because in Kenya, I don't think we can do four names. So I have four names. So Chepkoech means born in the morning. So we name according to different times, so times and seasons. So I was born very early in the morning. So Chepkoech means I was born between 5 to 6 a.m. in the morning. So at least that was what it means that. And then my other name, which is not in my official documents, but it's also my name, is Tapsirore. So Tapsirore is, so in the Nandi culture,
Mhm.
uh, where I come from, is that we get reincarnated. So when a child is born, it's somebody from the family is actually born again. And so what the grandmother does is, after 8 days, when the child has been born, they are named. And when the grandmother comes, the paternal grandmother, she observes the characteristics of this child, and this child is given different names based on that characteristics. And so when I was born, the name that I got was Tapsirore. Tapsirore was a woman who was very kind and she really helped a number of women who had gone through domestic violence. And so for me, that name is not just an it's a name that I carry because I honor my grandma, but also just remembering the history of our family. And then my last name is my dad's name, which is Muigei, which means it means to bury yourself.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Okay,
Yeah.
I see.
So it's
No, but
quite an interesting way of how people name themselves. Yeah.
I think it's all
Mm.
your name. It's beautiful, and I really thank you for sharing how it
Yeah.
how it's built and what it means. And thank you very much, Nancy, again for your time and for this wonderful interview. And I am sure this is not going to be the very last time we meet. As you said, uh, this seems like a club, this club of people working with foresight and futures that I think is not that exclusive. That's what we are trying to do,
Mhm.
just trying to open up this so more people can get engaged in this, more people um, can dedicate their work or their profession to foresight and futures so they can learn more about this. And this is part of my mission with these interviews, so people can uh, know about some professionals in other parts of the world, and they can know what they do and why they do it, why they dedicate their professional work to foresight and futures. And this conversation we had, I think, has been just wonderful for this. And I thank you very much, Nancy, and I'll see you very soon.
Thank you and have a nice day.
You too. See you.
Bye.